Good morning. My name is Alicia and I grow in western Pennsylvania with my family, and this is our golden acre. We live on one acre of land. We have 5 maple trees that we tap and make syrup in the spring, winter and spring. We have 8 chickens, and this is our garden. We have about 650 to 700 square feet of planting space in here. We grow, why don't we just show you? This first bed over here, along the fence, it goes the whole way down. We had started our like spring greens and radishes and all those kinds of things in this bed. We had a really weird spring that it stayed like cold for a really long time, and then we had weak 80s. So it seemed like everything kind of went in a holding pattern and then just bolted. So we didn't get quite the harvest from our radishes and our arugula and those kind of things as we would normally. So that's where we had started that here. Now we start with some black beans. I love doing dried beans. I love having a variety of things that don't require, or their processing to store is different. For the dried beans, I just let the plant kind of finish out, cut it, hang it on my patio and let it dry. And then as I have time, I can just shell those beans, or my girls can help me shell those beans. And it's just an easier thing than having like cucumbers and zucchini and tomatoes and those kind of things that have to be processed right away. Now this is the area of the garden that we had started a lot of greens, radishes and arugula. A lot of that bolted. Some of it I've torn out. Some of it I have left as blossoms for the pollinators. An observation for this year, so far I have not seen a cucumber beetle or a squash bug in the garden, and there's been a lot of these little things blossoming, like the radishes. We had rutabaga that had overwintered, a turnip that had overwintered and gone and blossomed and gone to seed. So we've had a lot of those kind of blossoms in our garden this year. And right now it's the end of June. We haven't seen any cucumber bugs. Now I've read that those are supposed to, having radishes going to blossom and those kind of things, attract more parasitic wasps. That may be helping us this year, or I may just misremembering the timeline of things, and we're about to get hit with them and it's just not their time to be out. Okay, so we're starting there with black beans, and we just have some radishes that have gone to seed, some lettuce that I'm letting go bolt and go to seed, either to save or just drop seeds right there and get volunteer lettuce later. Right here we planted some buckwheat. I put a bucket of compost in here and planted some buckwheat. This zucchini plant that I planted right here looks pretty sad. The size is small, the leaves are small, so I just felt like the soil needed some enrichment here. So we just started with some compost. There's our kale, another round of buckwheat in here, and then some more lettuce that we're letting go to seed. This is our wild rocket arugula. That overwintered last year, and we used a little bit of it, but now we're letting it go to seed. Again, lots of little flowers in the garden, just attracts your beneficial. It does seem to help. More onions and more black beans. I tuck those kind of absolutely everywhere. And then our next spot is, I'll put this on the screen because I always forget the type, but this is like a small eared corn, like a mini corn. The ears are like maybe 4 to 6 inches long. It's ready in 65 days. It's just really great for a smaller garden. So we have one shot. That should be ready in a couple weeks, and we actually planted some recently. And then we've got sweet potatoes in lots of different places here. There's 6 sweet potatoes at the end of our corn bed. This is an experiment that I just started, just seeing how those sweet potatoes grow in those 2 different options. And there's our Tumbling Tom Tomato plant that's looking absolutely wonderful. On either side of me, here's our cattle panel trellis with our sun rising over my head here. This is where we plant our winter squash. We have 3 different kinds planted here. We have a volunteer pole bean coming up right there. I'm just going to let that go and see how that does. So we have this, I think it's like Rosalina butternut squash. It makes a very large butternut squash. Our biggest last year, I think, was 12 pounds. Now, I planted a bunch of radishes with every winter squash this year. Again, just trying to help with those beneficials, see if that helps control our squash bugs and cucumber beetles. That does seem to be the absolute bane of any organic gardener with winter squash or cucumbers or anything like that. Over here is another kind. This one's one I'm going to have to put on the screen as well. It's a smaller butternut squash. I really love the flavor of the Rosalina butternut squash, but they're so big, it's difficult for us when everybody's working in school on a weeknight to use a squash that's that size. We kind of have to plan on using it on the weekend, and then one is typically too much for one meal, so we have to either plan multiple meals that use that butternut squash, which is fine, or we need to freeze part of it, which works sometimes, but sometimes it'd be nice to have like just one that's the size that you need for a recipe and not have to plan, like figure out what to do with the rest of it. So I have 4 hills of that type of squash planted here. As this starts getting taller or sending off vines, I'll train it up over the trellis and it's going to fill this space in. And then over here we planted some delicata. So we have 3 different kinds of winter squash. Now in years past, I always plant, I think you plant several plants in each spot, and then I had trouble making myself thin them. This year I thinned them down to 1. I had problems last year with like the plants like aborting the fruit, like they would start it, it looked good, and then it would just go soft and fall off. So one of the things I'm trying this year is to just try to grow less plants and see if that makes for better squash. Coming here off the squash is, I've got some tomato plants, some peas, some more black beans, some volunteer dill, a couple more tomato plants. Now this is interesting to me. This plant I planted about the middle of May, and look at the size of those leaves. This one I threw in a little bit later. It's kind of a little stunted. It's taken a while to get going. The color's coming along on it, but it's just way, way smaller. I keep kind of pinching off the blossoms on that one just so that it's not putting as much energy in trying to producing fruit. Gets the plant more established. And we'll see how that does. Now, here's another bed that has some Roma tomatoes. I've got 3 Romas. This was supposed to be a Roma, but I had it mislabeled. So there's a Amish paste. Now these tomatoes that have like the potato leaf on them, which I have multiple here. These guys right here. I have 2 types of tomato plants. I've got Brandywine and German pinks. I can't tell the difference once I plant them, and I didn't keep good records as to which was which. So anytime I see one of those in the garden, that's either a Brandywine or a German pink. I think the fruit looks a little bit different, so I might be able to tell once the fruit's more advanced. But disclaimer, anytime we see one of those, it's one of the 2. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 tomato plants planted kind of in this region of the garden. Scoot around here to the end. Okay, So this part right here was the original part of the garden when we moved in. It was all weeds, but it had been bricked in as a bed. This right here, our very first video on YouTube, my girls and I started our onion seeds. These are those onions. They're doing wonderful. Like I said, I love planting a lot of onions. I like planting the variety of things that don't require processing or don't require processing the same intensity as zucchini, cucumbers, and tomatoes and those kind of things. So I love onions because if I'm going to store them, we're just going to let them finish over, like fold over, pull them, lay them out to dry, and then cut the tops off and throw them in a crate, and we're good to go. Right here, this is a little bed that my girls and I threw together a few years ago to put some sunflowers in. It's some old hardwood flooring some scraps from hardwood flooring project. This year I put our walking onions in. I put them in way late after they sat on the counter all year, and they're still growing. So we'll see how we're going to use those. We're going to just let them get established. Now here is our sweet potato. It's a bed. It's an old composter. They have grown marvelously in here, so that is where we continue to grow them. I'm actually seeing the vines are trying to grab on to our tomato plant. We're just going to let those fall down opposed to climb up the Amish paste tomato plant. And then coming around the side, these are mostly, we have Amish paste, German Queen or German pink / Brandywine, and black strawberry. These are looking pretty good. Now, I've talked in my tomato videos about making sure you don't accidentally top your tomato plants when you're pruning off the suckers. I definitely managed to do that on this one. This one has quit growing because I pinched off the top accidentally. So this one has stopped here. And let's look at one. These two are the same type, and they are a good 6 to 8 inches taller because I didn't take the tops off of these. So it will be fine. I have 20 to 25 tomato plants is typically what I plant. So it's going to be just fine. This is our black strawberry. These tomatoes are absolutely beautiful. They're already got kind of that black part of what gives them their name. When they're ripe, the rest will be a red color. This is my first year for growing this variety. All right, and behind me, I'm actually really excited to see how this turns out. These are cave beans from Baker Creek. Last year I grew them for the first time. Cool story, something about the seeds were found in an archaeological dig, and carbon dating put them back like 1,500 years, and they germinated. So these were saved seeds from last year. Actually, some of them were some that I had soaked to use, let go too long, threw in the chicken run for compost, and they all like grew. So I just transplanted them over here. So they're climbing up the fence. We've got a fence at the top here that we attach to the top of 10-foot conduit, and then we zigzag string throughout. They are coming up wonderfully. I'm really excited to see what this looks like by the end of the season. I think it's just going to be a complete wall of green. And then in front of those, some of these are volunteer and some are not. We have potatoes. These are all volunteer potatoes, are ones I'd obviously missed when I harvested last year, so I just left those go. Now here I was planning on this being sweet potatoes. Again, we have some volunteer potatoes in there. We also have some sweet potatoes growing in here as well. Some of them are a little further along than others, and then more potatoes. And then look at that beautiful beans. They're all the way up. I have several that are all the way up to the fence at the top. That one right there only has about another 1.5 feet. before it's to the very top. All right, so we've kind of going around the perimeter. I guess I'll finish the perimeter and then we'll do this part right here. Okay, we have a few Brussels sprouts here. Last year I just grew 2. They took forever to finish. I need to get a little bit of BT on these because we're getting a lot of bug damage. What I'd like to do, I've got some red onions planted around the outside of them. They're kind of finishing out. I believe what I'm going to do there is harvest those. I think I'm going to ferment those onions because I love fermented red onions. And spray that with BT. And then I'm going to net it to keep the moths and things off that, because that's going to be there through the summer, through the fall. Last year I didn't harvest the Brussels sprouts until January 2nd. We had a pretty mild winter to start. Okay, more tomatoes here. We've got aroma at the end. Again, I was trying to put the aromas together, but I just got them mixed up a little bit. So we have aroma at the end. And then we've got 1, 2, 3 Brandywine / German pinks. And then we've got 3 Amana oranges. Those are like a real big slicer that is an orange tomato. They tend to be our first one that comes ready. In front of those are just some string bush beans. Confession, I hate string beans. I hate the texture. I've tried to prepare them multiple times. I hate them. I always try to grow them and then I dislike them. I'm growing kind of a smaller amount this year. My plan is to make fermented dilly beans with those. I like dilly beans. I just don't like string beans. I don't know. I keep trying. It has never worked. Okay, so we did the perimeter along with some of the inside. So now let's take a look here. Okay. So this part in here going down, I don't know if you can see with the glare, the onions at the other end of what I showed you. So here we've got carrots, more onions, and a zucchini plant with a lot of radishes planted around it, again with the hopes of bringing in our beneficials. This next bed is the next shot of corn. It's kind of hard to see unless I get closer. And that corn is up, and that was just planted a week ago. It'll be a week tomorrow that will be in the ground, so that's looking really good. And I actually tucked a black strawberry tomato plant in right there. That one got put in kind of late, so it's a little stunted. I just wanted to see if it could catch up and how it would produce. Okay, here we've got our cucumbers, and at the other end of that bed we've got our hot peppers. Love peppers, use them in lots of cooking, and also I'm planning on fermenting them as well. This bed here is all black beans. Again, I love the dried beans just because they're easy to process. They don't require like a lot of attention all at one time. I can just, as I'm like sitting watching TV or like listening to something, I can just be working on those a little bit at a time. My girls actually like to help with that, and they can do it for a little bit at a time, and it's kind of fun. So I like having those. And then I'm a vegetarian, my husband's not, but then we'll add those to chilies and soups, and we've got a black bean hummus that we really like to make. So that's just something, a good protein that we can add that's easy to store and easy to process. This next bed is our sweet potatoes, sweet peppers. We've got shishito, we've got sweet banana, we've got some cow wonders, got barking dogs in the background. Now there's one kind that I planted, it was like a honey gold or something like that. I'm not sure where that ended up. It might actually be that one right there. That little guy right, those little peppers right there. They actually look kind of similar to a shishito, but it looks like it's a little more squatty, and we'll let that go. The plant looks different, so that's, I think, what it is. And then we're back to our onions. Now in the center here, I've got a bed. These were actually the bricks that had been around the outside of the original garden. I just didn't like them being there because they just seemed to always be in the way. So we repurposed those to make a few garden beds. So we've got peas in here. We've got some rosemary. It smells amazing. This is another pepper here. This has gotten hit pretty hard by potato bugs. We've got an overabundance of potato bugs in our garden. I need to get the chickens loose in the garden, but my problem is I always have something growing. I think I've worked out a way, like a way to move them through the garden in specific beds once I start pulling stuff out. And we've got a bolted radish. We've got some thyme hiding in here that's looking really good, and again, smelling amazing. Something that I've discovered just this year, these are the seed pods for the radishes. Since we had so many bolt this year, tasted them, they're like mini radishes. So I almost recommend planting radishes and just let them bolt to eat the seed pods, because they are delicious. Okay, some more thyme. I am planning on putting something else in this bed once these lovely peas finish out, which is going to be kind of soon because it is getting hotter. We're almost to July. These more sweet potatoes, this is a new bed I added from just here to this planter. They're doing really well. And then here is our last bed of sweet potatoes. And then this is my Mother's Day present this year. Good evening. You'll notice at the beginning of the video I said good morning. I was doing a garden tour this morning early when the lighting was good, and somehow, somewhere like halfway through the video, my mouth and the sound weren't lining up. I don't know how that happens, but it did. So I was right about here. So I'm going to finish what I started this morning and try to get my first garden tour up for June before it's July. Here is our bed of garlic. This is getting really close to harvest time. When the greens are about between like 2/3, 3/4 brown, so a little over halfway brown, it's time to start digging them. This part looks like it's really close to me. This giant or elephant garlic looks like it's going to be a little longer. And here we've got like a spicy garlic. And actually, I'm seeing that I missed some scapes as I'm sitting here talking to you. And then in this bed, onions absolutely everywhere. Cabbage, basil, some more black beans, some broccoli that has bolted that I'm letting go so that we can add for the pollinators. And then this is a bumblebee sunrise bumblebee tomato. It's a real small tomato plant. And then we have a little bit of cauliflower too. All right. Well, in this space last year, we grew 475 pounds of food. Last year at this time I was contemplating starting YouTube, but didn't quite feel ready to take on the commitment of videoing and editing and posting and all of that. So what I did instead is I just decided to say, okay, well, what can I grow? How much can I grow in the space that I have? And so just every time I harvested, I would put what I harvested on a food scale and take a picture of it. And at the end of the year, I totaled it, and it was like 475 pounds. Now, there were lots of garden snacks. Like my husband said, do I have to weigh the peas before I eat them? Because for us, like the snap peas in the garden are just snacks as you're walking by, or the cherry tomatoes and those kind of things. I'm like, oh no, absolutely not. That's part of the fun of being in the garden. So, There's things that didn't get weighed. There were times I'd already have dumped something in a pot and be like, oh yeah, I didn't weigh that. But the total that we did have was 475 pounds of food, which I thought was pretty darn cool. I'm hoping to get a little bit more than that this year. I feel like I'm doing a better job with succession sowing and that kind of thing. Learning more all the time. That's what we do in life, in gardening. So thank you for joining me on my first garden tour. Hopefully everything's going to work and I can get this uploaded before my June garden tour, before we hit July. Hope you're having a good day.